So welcome everyone to our session on right effort as we continue to explore the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And we have talked about effort in other contexts because it seems to come up a lot in the Buddha's teachings. It's the third of the 7 factors of enlightenment, so we covered it there. It's in the Eightfold Path. It's one of the 5 spiritual faculties. It's one of the 10 paramitas. It's one of the 5 powers, and so on. It's almost on every list of things to practice or learn about and how to relate to it. So it's Viriya, which is the Pali word, which translates to most commonly to either effort or energy. Sometimes it can be called persistence, vigor, diligence, exertion. I've heard that word used, determination. So it's got that flavor of bringing that kind of persistence to our practice, that effort and energy, the energetic capacity to do something. So I'll open it up to folks. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but I'm curious what your thoughts might be about why do you think the Buddha spoke about this so often in his teachings? Why did it come up so often? I mean, if you look at other spiritual traditions, and I've spent some of my life doing that, you don't see this kind of focus on a word like effort in terms of your spiritual practice. But in the Buddha, it's not quite mentioned as much as the word mindfulness, but it's getting close. So I'm just curious, why do you think he, as a teacher, he taught for 45 years, why do you think he kept emphasizing and bringing up this notion of effort or energy in the practice? There's no right or wrong answer. I don't really know myself, but I'm curious what people might think, how you relate to it, I guess.
I guess how I see it, Steve, is that the mind is like, then he said, the mind is like a puppy that you have to train, and that there's a, and for me, if that's the case, and there's some effort in the training of the mind, there's like, you have to kind of bring it back all the time. And I find that's the case for me. I mean, and when I listen to your instructions, it's always like, your mind may wander. Well, my mind wanders all the time, and I have to bring it back. And I'm always surprised. I mean, today what was interesting is I kind of came back to a sense of stillness, and I thought, oh, still, and then my mind wandered away again. So I could see why effort is a constant with this one, because of just the nature of how the mind wants to latch onto a thought or think about the past, the future, or an issue.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me, at least how I feel, is that it's very easy to just stay with what you know and what you're used to, and with a certain inertia. And I need some sort of a push, which sometimes can be external, but if there isn't something critical happening, I have a tendency just to stay with what is. So I need that little extra push. That's what I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My first thought was just, and it was just really impulsive, was to say, because Buddhism is hard. Like, it's hard to keep doing this every day. And like what Carl said, like bring the mind back over and over again. And, I just want to be lazy and comfortable. And that's not what this is to me. Not that it's not joyful and all of that too, but just my very first thought was, because this stuff is really hard and you need to work. So.
Yeah, the mind, the habits of the mind are highly conditioned over decades, right? So it takes some persistence to untangle the knot that's formed from all that, all the habits of mind and conditioning, because that's really what we're doing. And spoke about training the mind like training a puppy dog. Which is a helpful way to look at it. It's seeing those habits of mind and cultivating, in fact, new habits of mind. In fact, physically, new neural pathways in our brains. So it takes some determination, as you've pointed out, but it also takes kind of an artful touch. And we'll speak a bit about that. It requires a delicate and artful touch, so that it doesn't become over striving, so that it doesn't become the egoic mind kind of hijacking your practice with its fairly strong willfulness, which can really happen. And the Buddha's also spoke about that as well. So I said that I was going to talk a bit about willful effort and the role that it might have, because in the past I've spoken so much about, that we've had a whole series of talks years ago. Some of you will remember when we explored some of Rodney Smith's teachings and the whole notion of, and Sam Harris, I think we heard a talk by him about how there is no will. It's an illusion, right? There's no personal will. It's actually an illusion. So here, is there a role for personal will? Is there a role for the illusion of personal will? So, because if we don't apply some effort, we're just caught in our habitual patterns, right? We see that how easy it is to just become unconscious and just be kind of, what's the word? Kind of like a snowball down a hill, just kind of going with these unconscious habits on autopilot, I guess you could say. So there needs to be something. The Buddha, the title of the talk was "Strive on untiringly." I think balanced effort in the practice. Strive on untiringly were the three last words that the Buddha spoke before he died. He talked about how that everything's impermanent, and let the Dharma be, that you don't need to have appoint another teacher. Let the Dharma be the teacher. Everything's impermanent, including himself. And then he ended with strive on untiringly. That's a very strong statement to strive on and to keep practicing. I used to say this a lot, and I haven't said it for years, but I used to say, practice like your hair's on fire. Practice like your hair's on fire. And I wasn't, and I stopped saying it because I used to really call upon people's motivation and personal will to get them to as beginning, in particular, beginning practitioners to meditate, to do the meditation practice, to do that exploration once a day. So that was one of the, I'm not sure where I came across it, but I did a little digging, and the Buddha actually spoke about this. And I'll read you the quote where it comes from. Just as one whose clothes or head had caught fire would put forth extraordinary effort, zeal, enthusiasm, mindfulness, and clear comprehension to extinguish the fire on his clothes or head, so that person should put forth extraordinary effort, zeal, enthusiasm, mindfulness, and clear comprehension to obtain wholesome qualities. So he's basically saying, just like you'd put out a fire on your hair or your clothes, that's the same kind of zeal and effort that you would bring to the practice to cultivate the wholesome qualities of mind and to abandon the unwholesome qualities of mind. So can you think of ways that willful effort might play a role in this practice? So willful, meaning that kind of egoic, yeah.
Yeah, maybe this isn't willful effort, but for me, to start anything, before I put any effort into it, I have to know what I am wanting to do. So for me, that the will part is looking at what that intention is, so that then the effort can follow that intention. So for me, that's where the will comes in, but it's, yeah.
Thanks. Well, the one thing I've noticed in this practice is at the beginning, in particular, it takes a certain amount of, there is a certain amount of willful effort that motivates the practice. People that come to this practice in the West or in sort of not just Western, but non-Buddhist countries tend to come to it because there's suffering in their lives, or they've had an event in their life that they're trying to deal with. There's stress. And so there's that sense of wanting to, to do something about that. So then there what arises is a willful effort to engage in this practice in some way. And I never discourage, somebody that's applying that willful effort to want to fix something in their lives. I never try to bust the story and say, well, there's really no you, and there's no, and it's all, I encourage that willful effort to just keep practicing. However it starts out. So I think in the beginning, this willful effort is very important. And eventually we start to see the impermanent, selfless nature of what's arising. But in the beginning, we're really just practicing and exploring what our experience is, and that takes willful effort. I think I told you the story when I was teaching this to graduate social work students. I gave them 15% of their grade was to meditate for 45 minutes every morning and write reflections on it. And I told them that if they faked it, I would know. I've been doing this for a while. And if they didn't meditate and just made up, I would know right away. And so some people were actually quite angry with me because I was basically, saying 15% of your grade, you have to meditate. I mean, they signed up for a course called mindfulness and social work. So they weren't antagonistic to the idea, but still that was a big commitment in their time. So what happened was, all the really, I don't know if type A personalities is the word, or the achievers, right? The ones who want A's in the course, they were very diligent in doing their meditation. Like the ones who a B is fine were less likely to meditate, but the ones who had that real determination were the ones that practiced. And so many of them came up to me after the course and said, I was not very happy with you having, this kind of put upon me to do this every day. But I wanted to get a good grade and I did it. And it's the best thing I've ever done. Right. It shifted, I didn't know that what happened would happen just from, sitting and doing this exploration for 45 minutes, but it had a tremendous impact. So I always think of that when I think of how personal will can motivate us to actually do the practice. And then the other place I think and then after a while, we find meditation almost gets effortless. You do it for enough years, and you have days when there's the mind is active, but that's not a problem, right? You kind of know that those days come and go, and the meditation just kind of just happens. It's not, there's no the standards that we might set in the early days of our practice of what a good meditation is or bad meditation. Kind of let go of those, and it's just whatever arises is what arises, and it seems to be this flow and effortlessness to the meditation. What I think then happens is there's another point further down the path where there's a real determination that needs to arise to see the truth. And the Buddha, well, when he became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, he actually said, "I'm going to sit under this tree until the truth is revealed," with quite a determination that he said that. So he addressed that fact. So the Buddha also talked about when is the right time to practice effort, and when it's not the right time to practice effort. So I found this interesting too. When the mind is restless due to the hindrance of restlessness and remorse, it's the wrong time to practice effort. When the mind is sluggish due to the hindrance of what's called sloth and torpor, kind of sleepiness, it's the right time to practice effort. So to bring that urgency and that energy to the practice. Now, personally, I deal a lot more with restlessness, busy mind, than I do with sleepiness. I used to say I've never gotten sleepy meditating, but I think I have a few times lately. But 99.9% of the time, it's restless mind that arises, not sleepiness as a hindrance. So I can easily over effort. So if you're sitting and the mind starts thinking and you notice it, you come back, it does it again, you notice it, you come back. The practice isn't to go, okay, I gotta really hang on. I gotta really apply some effort here to hang on to the present moment. That just creates more tension in the body, and more tension in the body translates into tension in the mind, which arises as restlessness. So the practice there is what I do, if the mind wanders, I bring it back, mind wanders, and it just keeps happening, as I go back to the body. I go, we started with that body scan. I go back and I go, just check in with the body. Where is there any places where there's tension that's accumulated, any holding that's present, allow it to soften and release. And just kind of, because there's the body and the mind are very interlinked. So if there's tension in the body, then there tends to be a restlessness in the mind. So that's the way to practice with restlessness, as opposed to, I don't know, how many do people have, what do people struggle with? Is it more restlessness or more sloth and torpor? So raise your hand if it's more restlessness. Okay, and raise your hand if it's more sleepiness. Okay, well, God, it's interesting. Almost an even split, which is so for if sleepiness is what's arising, then that's where the effort comes to bear, this urgency of the practice, bringing some energy. You can even stand up. You can actually, well, some teachers actually have their tea or something before they meditate, or their coffee, if that's what is helps them to stay awake, to stand up. You can contemplate the urgency of the practice, or contemplate this preciousness of this human birth to practice. So the urgency and energy, bringing that to and just staying very kind of laser focused on what's arising in the present moment, can be helpful with sloth, with sleepiness. I remember John Kabat-Zinn was giving a talk, a teacher and a friend, Dharma teacher and a good friend. And the person said, I always get sleepy. In fact, I fall asleep quite often when I'm practicing, or almost fall asleep. I get kind of daydreamy when I practice a lot. And John said, so he said, have you ever driven your car while you're sleepy? And the person said, oh yeah, there's lots of times when I'm feeling sleepy and I'm driving the car. And he said, well, do you fall asleep and drive off the road? Oh, no, I don't fall asleep when I'm driving the car. Well, why not? Well, because I could die. He goes, well, bring that same urgency to your meditation. Practice as if your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. Those are exact words. Practice as if your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. So bring that same sense of urgency to the practice, which is interesting. When he said that, I thought, wow, that's true. You don't fall asleep when you're driving, for the most part. I mean, it does happen, but it's not too common. Another quote from the Buddha. He emphasized, okay, this is what I was saying before, he emphasized the importance of right effort in the final attainment of truth. So what happens as you start to see more and more the kind of three marks: the cause of suffering, the impermanence and selflessness, the illusion of a separate self. The egoic mind gets kind of rebellious and starts to really push back. That's what is referred to as Mara, and when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, or what we sometimes call the devil in Christianity, could be seen as analogous to that. He said, and this is a quote from the Buddha: exertion is most helpful for the final attainment of the truth. If one didn't make an exertion, one wouldn't finally attain the truth. Because one makes an exertion, one finally attains the truth. Therefore, exertion is most helpful for the final attainment of truth. So you notice that the effort is applied to the aspiration of the attainment of truth, not fixing the self in some way. It's not an effort to fix the self. It's not a self-improvement aspiration. It's to find the truth. So it's not like I'm going to put all this effort to be more compassionate, or I want to be, less of this or more of that, right? Or less stressed out, more compassionate, whatever we can come up with as kind of a way of fixing the self. It's not that, because that can just become a willful effort, misplaced willful effort, I guess I would call it. So we can call upon this willful effort, I think, at the beginning of the practice, and I think in particular at the beginning and at the latter stages of our practice. I think those are two key places where willful effort plays an important role. So in a sense, we're using the illusion of personal will to propel our practice and to attain the truth. So and this is one of the there's so many paradoxes in this practice, and this would be one of them, another one of them. But we have to be careful here that, so the personal will may get you on the chair or on the cushion, but this is in the service of seeing the illusion of a separate self, right? And seeing how the personal will wants to control and grasp, right? And push away, how it causes suffering. It's the same personal will that's causing suffering that you're harnessing to propel your practice, if that makes sense to you. Now, I've never taught this before, so this is, if it's not making sense, it's, and I've never heard anybody teach it quite this way. The talks that I hear, people are really emphasizing wise effort and effortless effort, and not bringing personal will or what's often called willful effort to the practice. In fact, it's almost seen as phases. You go from personal will to wise effort, or it's a willful effort to wise effort to effortless effort, and they're kind of seen as you go through those three as your practice deepens and develops. But if the Buddha is to be believed, it seems like there's a role for this persistence and effort in the final stage of attainment, of seeing the truth. So, but ultimately, the illusion of the personal will needs to be seen and faced. We surrender. The practice is surrendering, actually, to this notion of a personal will. Awakening comes from a complete letting go of the personal will and of the separate self. So does that make sense? You're in a sense harnessing the personal will to see its own illusion, right? Because the whole Four Noble Truths, you're seeing the illusion you're seeing how the personal will causes suffering, how the egoic mind's struggle with what is, the grasping and pushing away, the clinging causes suffering. But you're bringing this effort, which can also be partly the personal will to do that. I think that it's in a way it's very deep the way the Buddha did this, brought to bear something that is to also be seen as an illusion. Because it's quite clear he was not just talking about effortless effort in these suttas. He was talking about willful effort, exertion, diligence, determination. These are very willful words. They're not gently kind of portrayed. So it's, I think it's a helpful way to look at effort. And I'm really seeing it more and more in my own personal practice. In the Eightfold Path Suttas, he talks about bringing effort to the practice to do four things: to prevent the arising of unwholesome states, to abandon unwholesome states, to arouse wholesome states not yet arisen, and to maintain and strengthen wholesome states. So he's very specific in these four ways that effort gets applied, and he gives some direction on that. So one that's key, I think, is the abandonment of unwholesome states. Right? Unwholesome states arise. It's quite surprising how an unwholesome state can just explode into presence, seemingly from nowhere. So, unwholesome states are things like anger and jealousy, those kinds of, kind of based on greed and ill will. Can you think of ways, methods? I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Methods that you could employ that would help you abandon an unwholesome state once it's arisen. So anger arises, or impatience, or jealousy, or whatever it might be. A way to abandon that, because the Buddhists talk specifically about abandoning unwholesome states and cultivating wholesome states. So what do you do when an unwholesome state arises? What have you tried?
I try to kind of do a meta analysis of it, or like sit with it, and I guess it's like examine it. Why is it arising? Where is it coming from? Is it really about the person I'm angry at? Let's say, or is it like have they said something that kind of gets into a hole of mine? I try to bring it back to those sorts of things for myself.
So looking at it directly,
Yeah.
direct experience of it, and investigating its arising. Yeah.
I find with anger it's easier to do. With fear it's another another issue. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, that's what I try to do.
I try to remember that saying. I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh that says, if you're angry with someone, look at them and remember, think of them in 300 years. You'll both be long dead. And how important will this really be, in the big picture of things? And that's more anger. And fear, I definitely do something physical, because I can't mentally, I can't manage that energy without taking kind of an edge off of it. And labeling has been helpful, the whole top 10 thing. So I've gotten to about 7 of my top 10s. And now when I label something, I say, oh, that's what if the bad thing world version. So it's like I'm worrying about the world, the world blowing up. Then I say, oh, that's what if the bad thing global version. And somehow it just takes a little bit extra zing out of it than if I just said thinking or worrying. So, yeah.
I've been following the instruction often just to turn to the body and see what's going on there. And I've been finding that works quite well. If there's some strong emotion and I just sit quietly and just with curiosity look at what's going on in the body, over some space of time, it sort of starts to dissipate.
Yeah, I try to do that too, but sometimes the emotion's too strong. So I need to do something physical to just kind of, well, first of all, separate myself from the trigger, whatever situation it is. Maybe, get some of the energy out physically, and then I'll be able to sit and then try to reflect where in the body I'm feeling it. And somehow when there's a congruency between what's going on in here and where I can feel it in the body, then I can feel there's a shift. And often I will feel it in one part of the body, but the more I sit with it, the more it starts to morph and change and go to a different part of my body. And it's that part that really helps to release it. It's not to say it's not going to happen again, but it helps that process just move along slowly.
Yeah. Yeah, these are really beautiful ways of engaging with what are called unwholesome states of mind. So yeah, several of you brought up that notion of going to the body. So we're really looking at what's the direct experience of this emotional state as kind of being our go-to, right? It's unless it's overwhelming, as was pointed out, an unwholesome state, which manifests as an strong emotion, can actually be overwhelming, and it's too much in that moment to sit with it, as we say, right? And sitting with it simply means feeling it in the body, noticing what thoughts arise that are feeding it, and the storyline that's feeding it, the papancha. That's the investigation, right? The investigation part of it. So first of all is being conscious of it, feeling into it, sensing into it, mind, thoughts, and body sensations, and then the stories that are feeding it. So that's kind of what the Buddha basically said was, one of the key ways that we abandon unwholesome states, because you're actually investigating and learning what's actually triggering it in the investigation. The other ways is one he pointed out. You've pointed out, I think, actually all of them, perhaps but one. One was using the opposite as an antidote. So if anger arises, to contemplate loving kindness or compassion, or ill will arises, loving kindness. So kind of using the opposite, the wholesome state. It's the opposite of the unwholesome state. He called it the word that gets translated is antidote, but it's kind of like more like a counterbalance. So it kind of pulls you out of that unwholesome mind state. The second one was that was kind of brought up, respect for the what would a wise person do in this in this situation. It was how it's kind of worded. It's not something I practice, although I do sometimes think of the Dalai Lama sometimes pops into my head and is just his face or something, right? But that's kind of more of an antidote, I think. But just kind of what would the wise do, to deal with this mind state that's arisen. The other is deliberate diversion of attention. And that was brought up. Go for a run, do something that dissipates the energy. And this is particularly helpful if it's an overwhelming emotional mind state that's arisen. So in other words, I mean, the Buddha's quite clear. We don't have to sit with everything that arises and feel it in the body and investigate it. In fact, I think we almost kind of overdo it sometimes as Dharma teachers, say, encouraging people to sit with it. The Buddha kind of gave 5 options, and one of them was to sit with it and investigate it. The other 4 were quite different. So one of them is just diversion of attention, and for me, exercise is a good one if it's possible in that moment, or just pulling, as I think someone said, getting out of that situation, pulling yourself out of the environment that triggered it. And the last one, the 5th one, is that the Buddha kind of worded it: if all else fails. So in other words, try the being with it, and then try these other ones. And if all else fails, forcibly repress the unwholesome state. Forcibly repress is how it's translated, the unwholesome state. So there's some real willful effort there if you've ever heard it. So he's basically saying, just get rid of it somehow and get back to equilibrium, get back to cultivating wholesome states. Joseph Goldstein, he used, I don't know if he still calls it this, but years ago, he used to call it cowboy dharma. he likened it to, at the fair where you shoot down the little things that pop up. I don't know if they still do that at fairs, or you throw darts at balloons. I guess you could call it dartboard dharma too. You kind of forcibly eject it, or forcibly shoot down the target, the unwholesome states. You're forcibly getting rid of it. If you want to see an interesting YouTube video that really displays deliberate diversion, go into YouTube and type in marshmallow experiment. And I used to actually show this video to people learning to meditate, because it not only displays diversion of attention, it actually displays almost what it's like to meditate for new meditators, because these kids are given a marshmallow. They're little kids given a marshmallow, and they're told if they don't eat that marshmallow, when the person comes back, they'll get another marshmallow, and they'll have 2 marshmallows. And then they're left in a room by themselves with this marshmallow sitting on a plate. And then they're filming all this, so they kind of go from child to child as they sit with, with this marshmallow that they want to eat. So they're just kind of the methods that they use to divert their attention from it, or the struggle that they go as the ego mind wants that marshmallow, and they're trying to override it with their another part of their brain. So those are the methods that the Buddha talked about to abandon unwholesome states. Arousing wholesome states, you've got the four Brahma Viharas, the loving kindness meditation, compassion meditation, maintaining and strengthening wholesome states that have already arisen. You dwell in them when they arise. That's a really beautiful practice to, and perhaps not one that's emphasized enough in meditation and mindfulness Dharma circles, because we tend to talk a lot about how to deal with, mindfully deal with unwholesome states. But when a wholesome state arises, and I noticed this for myself, I had an unwholesome state arise from nowhere. I was actually, I went out, Vida and I went out to the store to buy some groceries, and I figured I'd just be darting from the car into the grocery store. So I didn't put a sweater on. I put a little thin coat on and bring a hat. And then halfway there, we realized we needed fuel for the car, gasoline. So, and I thought, I don't want it. Right away, my mind went into, I don't want to pump gas right now. I just pull over, and all of a sudden, I just this anger arose in me, because and the credit card wouldn't work. So I was feeding the anger was then making the situation worse, because now I was going to be cold even longer, because I was trying to rush and wasn't being I was totally unconscious. Like I haven't seen that level of unconsciousness arise in me for quite some time. It was shocking. I was 100% unconscious, and I really investigated it, and once I got back into the car, I spent a lot of time. Actually, I spent probably hours that day looking at it and what happened and what triggered it and so on. Then I realized that I'm really dwelling on an unwholesome mind state. Because in all that time, some wholesome mind states came up, but I was just like, oh yeah, no, I got to think more about that. Why anger came up, and then I realized, no, we're dwelling with a wholesome mind state is what's called for here. So then I just started to, the couple of days after that, whenever a wholesome mind state would arise, I would just dwell in it, just kind of absorb it and allow it to permeate my being. So that happened just this week. I kind of learned saw directly the importance of dwelling and even recollecting. You can even recollect a wholesome mind state and then dwell in it. You'd be amazed just recollecting something that's occurred, or a mind state that arose, and dwelling in it can be quite helpful. So I have a question here to ask. In the guided meditation, I spoke a lot about balancing effort, bringing a balanced effort. Why do you think it's emphasized, and I will continue to emphasize the notion of bringing a balanced effort? So noticing if you're over efforting, noticing if you're under efforting.
So this is an example that came to me when you were speaking earlier. And so if you're trying to untangle a bunch of Christmas tree lights or necklaces or anything that's got tangled, it occurs to me that you can't just kind of go and, you know, expect everything to just like fall into the place you want it to. And you can't just kind of throw it away or just drop it. You know, there needs to be like kind of a finesse of curiosity and looking at it, you know, at a small knot, and then, you know, the thing as a whole, and then back. And there seems to be that kind of flow that, you know, kind of you kind of push and then pull back, and then you push a little bit to find that the right way of being able to do that particular task. And it occurred to me that that's probably what may, you know, help me, because I always wonder about, well, is this too much effort? What does too much effort mean? Or what does too little effort mean? You know, I'm always and then I'm getting caught up in the semantics of what the words mean. And it's, you know, so rather than actually look at the practice. But I think, you know, giving yourself a little bit of guideposts as to, okay, so if I'm sleepy, then that's too little. But if my mind is like racing, it's too much. And then kind of, you know, finesse and have that curiosity between the two. So.
That's a beautiful, I love that Christmas light. Because the Buddha often talked about it's like untangling a knot. Yeah, untangling a tangle. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on the importance of bringing balance? Yeah.
I've often heard the instruction, make every effort, and probably from you in part, make every effort, but let go of the result. And I'm assuming that there's sort of a balance there. You need some investment of energy and effort so that things actually happen. But if you go too far, then you start attaching to the result, and that's going to lead to more suffering and so on.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think in the again, and the way the Dharma is unfolding in Canada and other countries, there's a real emphasis on downplaying striving, over-efforting. But there's a role for it. It just, as you both pointed out, needs to be balanced in some way, and to know if it's the ego hijacking. That's the, you know, being attached to an outcome. That's what the ego likes to, you know, get attached to an outcome, and then judge what's unfolding based on a standard that it's created. I kind of look at it as you could look at it as a dial, you know, tuning the effort up enough to be present, to, you know, to bring the intention to bear, dialing it back if it seems to be getting too tight, and tension and restlessness arises. So just kind of continually tuning a dial. The Buddha talked about tuning an instrument. If the strings are too tight, that you can't play. The instrument won't sound right, and if it's too loose, the instrument won't sound. You just have to get that string on the guitar or the lute, in his example, just with the right amount of well-tuned string, so that it doesn't break, but it plays a sound. Yeah. kind of a balance between effort and surrender. Right? So much of the practice, we talk about surrender. Surrendering to what is. But here we're actually bringing some effort to bring an intention to bear. So we're kind of arousing some interest and some energy in our practice to kind of play at the edges of our comfort zone. And if we just did all what was comfortable all in this practice, we wouldn't play at those edges, right? We're really kind of approaching what is, what our edge of our comfort zone, and this takes energy, strength, courage. The word courage is often used. Keeps us practicing with unwholesome states, developing the wholesome mind states. So it's only by kind of getting to that edge, right? Playing at that edge of our comfort zone, that we discover how our habitual patterns kind of keep us trapped in the dream state, in the illusion of a separate self. So when energy is balanced, effort's balanced, it allows us to play at that edge, but also without creating tension. So it's this balance between effort and surrender. I kind of like to talk about it. It's purposeful, and it's surrendering to what's unfolding, to nature unfolding. We're surrendering to what's unfolding. So it's a paradox, right? And if grasping that paradox can be a real turning point in our practice. The egoic minds may be arguing a little with the whole notion of the balancing effort and surrender, but effort is a means. It takes effort to bring attention to the breath and to maintain attention on the breath. Right? You can see that it takes an energetic efforting to know that we're breathing, to sense into the sensations of breathing. Yeah. Any questions out there about effort, or how the way in which we've explored it today?
I guess what I was thinking was how, like, describing this as a practice is sort of like a noun and a verb for me. It's like it's a thing, and yet it's a thing I do. And and I guess that if it's a thing I do, then it requires effort. So it has that meaning, those kinds of two meanings for me. So that's why I'm sort of looking at it.
Yeah, you could call it efforting. You could put an ing on it. We're efforting, surrendering and efforting. Those, same with it's all practice. It's all discovery, right? Even a lot of people call the Four Noble Truths the Four Ennobling Truths, because they're not truths that are meant to be just believed. They're activities that we do to see for ourselves. So in a way, you can look at how you relate to effort in a similar way. It's not, you don't believe that this is what effort is and this is how you should apply it. If I say, if there's restlessness, to go to I'm just telling you what I do. And it's an invitation to try to see if that, in your experience, what happens. If restlessness arises, busy mind, the tendency is for us to get tighter, to try to control the mind. So what happens if we loosen up and we actually just release that, go to the body and just kind of check in where the body's at? See if there's some tension present, and it's okay if there is, right? So we're just checking in. But it's a efforting, but it's a practice. That's a beautiful way to put it, actually. All these words are just ways of exploring different dimensions of what's arising. But with effort, we play with it and see what it feels like. Just noticing. And how the practice deepens. Joseph Goldstein talks about, what's he call it? Almost mindfulness. It's kind of more or less mindfulness, more or less mindful. He says, even at 7-day silent retreats, he notices that most people, the vast majority of people, are wandering around more or less mindful. So they might be moving slowly, eating slowly, walking slowly, but they're more or less mindful. The effort's just not quite there that's bringing them present with what's arising. He used to ask people, so he'd notice somebody, doing something, and he'd say, so what did you notice? Or he'd just bring up anything. What did you notice when you were brushing your teeth this morning? And the person would say, oh, didn't really, don't notice anything in particular. He goes, oh, okay. So then the person, of course, would, next time they brush their teeth, they'd be like, okay, I'm noticing this, I'm noticing that. Then they'd go back to the interview, I paid attention to brushing. So what did you notice while you were putting your clothes on in the morning? So then they'd go back and they'd be really, very applying that effort to be very present, enough effort to be present with what's happening. And then he, of course, ask something else, and this could go on for the whole retreat. The point being that, it's not in more or less mindfulness, we're not actually bringing enough effort to bear to be present, to be aware of what's happening moment by moment. Right? We're just kind of floating around. We might notice the mind wanders, and we kind of bring it back. And it's kind of a more. I like more or less mindful. So it's a powerful practice to bring enough effort to bear so that we're aware of what's happening moment by moment. Sayadaw Tanjaniya says that that's his definition of effort. Just enough effort to be aware of what's happening in the present moment. That's enough effort. It's one way to look at it. It's a good start. Yeah. I've given you lots to think about on this topic. Yeah. So practicing with restless mind, practicing with sleepy mind, ways to engage effort with both of those, which are both quite common by the hands that went up. Noticing when you're more or less mindful, or whether you're present, aware of what's arising. So if somebody asked you, what were you aware of when you did X or Y, would you be able to tell them? Think about that as you go through the day. Am I present enough with what I'm doing moment by moment that if somebody asked me to tell them what was arising when I was doing this, would I be able to tell them? Very, very interesting practice to bring that effort to the practice, and to notice when we're out of balance in our efforting, over efforting or under efforting. Be another key part of this practice, and balancing effort and surrender. Yeah. So